You get a truckload of documents. This is a very time-consuming process, and maybe 10% of what you get actually makes it into a news story.
What time did it sort of hit you that this is a huge problem?
First time I did it.
You created something called Djinn. What exactly is Djinn?
It's a general platform for news gathering. It's finding the news for us. It models the newsworthiness of each document, summarizes it, and enriches that information with everything you need to make a quick snap judgment on whether a document is newsworthy or not.
In this episode, I'm speaking with Lars Giske, head of AI at iTromsø, a small local newsroom in northern Norway that's doing something big. With a background in investigative journalism, he and his team is making innovation in local news. One of the stand-up projects, Djinn, which stands for Data Journalism Interface for News Gathering and Notification. It's an AI-powered platform that helps journalists spot important stories hidden in thousands of public documents, and the results are simply amazing.
We freed up 80% of the time we spent doing research to do other stuff, and we can spend that time.
Journalists are typically used to going through piles and piles of documentation, either from municipalities or if there's any other things. Lars, what was the expression on the faces of your journalists when you told them, we just have an AI bot that can do this work for you, and we're saving you lots of hours? What was the reaction?
They were hardly surprised at all. Totally blank. Because they knew about this from the start. They were involved from the get-go in the project. They knew what was coming.
So there was nothing coming in like surprisingly that out of this. So this was a planned work in this case.
It was planned work, and it's kind of key to how we develop tools in iTromsø as well. Like, if we were just sitting in some kind of vacuum developing tools for the journalists, nobody would use it, right? Like, we need input, we need correction, course correction as we were developing. Like, we need them heavily involved because their needs that we need to meet, right?
I think that's the way to go about it. But a more important question, Lars, who are you, and how did you get into journalism?
So, who am I? Well, that's quite the existential question. Hard to answer. But work-wise, I'm the head of AI at iTromsø, which is a small local newsroom in northern Norway covering the Tromsø municipality. I have a background as an investigative and data-driven reporter, as well as a desk editor, and have slowly over the years transitioned into more kind of AI-focused development work and strategy work.
Was it always the natural choice for you to go into journalism? Was that sort of what you, as when I was a kid, I said to my family, guys, I got it all figured out. My dream job, not to be an astronaut, I'm gonna be a B2B software salesperson. That's what I'm gonna be. So you were saying at that time to your kids, I'm gonna be a journalist.
No. I remember my mom told me when I was 7, visiting Greece for the first time. I think I said I want to become a philosopher.
What?
Already at 7.
Really?
And that kind of almost happened as well. I have a master's in philosophy, and I've taught philosophy. I had no idea I was going into publishing or journalism in any form or way, up until a good friend of mine who is a journalist said, you ought to try it. I was getting fed up with work as it was. They gave me an opportunity, and I blossomed. I loved it. It was really, really fun.
What's the similarities between philosophy and journalism?
I think it's a critical approach. Like, both are kind of contingent on being systematic in the way you think and approaching problems critically. And that's the best way to kind of illuminate a story or some kind of societal problem, what have you. You know, like, the approach is the same.
And we're probably going to get into it, but I'm also curious later on. I'm going to ask you how that plays into when you're working with AI in that case. But then your background is in investigative journalism, and I think having to work with journalists, I see that a lot of the time they spend is in really digging into like the public documents that we started this with. Did you have this challenge, and why is this something that you saw as sort of like this? There must be a better solution to this, probably. Talk to me a little bit like your experience in investigative journalism and how you saw this.
That's always where we encounter roadblocks. It's in kind of these, we call them freedom of information access requests, or FOIA requests, where we ask for data or information from the public sector. We tell them, we want this, can you give it to us? And it takes forever to get it. And that's something every journalist encounters as they, at least in Norway. I don't know how it is other places, but a lot of journalists will encounter this kind of problem. And then you get a truckload of documents back often, and you have to go through it all as well. So there's a huge time being spent on just formulating the request, charting what data you need, refining the request, sending it, then waiting for them to answer, getting it all back, and then going through it all. This is a very time-consuming process, and maybe 10% of what you get actually makes it into a news story. So it's quite a time-consuming process. That combined
just on this, like what time did it sort of hit you that sort of, Jesus Christ, this is a huge problem?
First time I did it. In addition to all the work that goes into formulating the request, getting the data and everything, there's also that roadblock in the middle of this process where they say no. And you almost, that happens 50% of the time. And then you have to formalize a complaint and run the process again. It's and you end up getting the documents often. There's very rarely a good reason to keep something hidden. At least in Norway, the laws are very clear on what should be transparent information. So it's easy to kind of stick to the law, but often public systems don't adhere to it as well as they should.
How does that work in terms of you maybe talked with others in other countries like Norway? Do you find sort of it being very transparent in Norway versus other places, or is this sort of like a common thing?
At least. I think there's more of a culture for transparency that goes back to Danish law in the 1800s, the archive laws. I think it's Christian, one of the Danish kings, who was kind of a pioneer when it came to public access to information. And we have seen the trend moving towards similar kind of legal frameworks in the EU, but they're still more restricted on what they can give out. It's harder. The government in Norway is very good at keeping archives, archiving pretty much everything from down to SMSs being sent on a work phone to public correspondence with the citizenry or other third parties. And this is quite easy to gain access to as a journalist.
To sort of take everything into account here is then you are then investigative journalist, a knack for tech, found out that, oh my God, I'm spending way too much time going through piles of documentation in municipality, that being, for example, new buildings or other things. So you sort of then identified the challenge in this case. So
it's kind of twofold. That's one part of it, which we're working on in some sort of way, using AI tooling. So it's a whole kind of FOIA request workflow on one side, and on the other side, it's the actual publicly available archives, where we don't have to file a request, but we can go in and look through those archives and find newsworthy items or relevant items to what we're working on. But that's also incredibly time consuming. You spend hours sorting through irrelevant information to find those tidbits that could be useful to you.
And in a newspaper like iTromsø up north, how many investigative journalists do you have?
We have, it's kind of a team effort. Everyone works with these kind of stories. Even if you're not an investigative journalist, you will be told to, for example, go through the municipal archive from day to day. But specifically, kind of working on these bigger investigative projects, we have a data desk consisting of 5 people. which is a combination of journalists, developers, analysts.
So you now saw sort of here the challenge in terms of then how long time it took. And you wanted to do something about it. And you created something called Djinn, which I'm very keen on learning more about in this case. And what exactly is Djinn? What does it do? Take us through it.
Like, if I was to summarize it into the shortest sentence possible, it's a general platform for news gathering. It's finding the news for us. That's what Djinn is. But more like to be concrete, like what actually is it? It's a platform that sources today around 12,000 municipal documents every month regarding zoning, planning, urban development, what have you, like anything that has to do with how our homes are changing. And also public correspondence regarding that topic. Then it models the newsworthiness of each document, summarizes it, and enriches that information with entities, sender, receiver, everything you need to make a quick snap judgment on whether a document is potentially newsworthy or not. So what it does, it helps us cut down time sitting in kind of unorganized archives where you have very little to go on when you're looking for newsworthy items. You usually have like just metadata, a title. That's all you have to go on. And you have to read every document to find maybe that tidbit of text in the document that could be newsworthy. That's a manual workflow. What Djinn does, it does all this for us and provides us a ranked list of the most newsworthy documents as they come in continuously throughout the day. And then alerts journalists in Slack if there's anything that's relevant to that.
But what's the process getting into building something like this? And then what gets me very curious is, how does an AI know if something is newsworthy or not?
Okay, let's start with the first part of that, because like I said initially, like we involved the journalists from the get-go. We had a need, like we saw it, our news editor very clearly stated that we're not covering how Tromsø is changing good enough for a local paper that's supposed to cover Tromsø. Like we were getting beat by our competition on urban development stories, like the human touch stories involving urban development, all these kind of things. We weren't good enough. And that's something we've seen over time. And then we figured, okay, we have to figure out why this is happening. How can we get better? So we invited our senior journalists, that kind of the people in the newsroom that kind of knows this beat the best, and asked, why are we getting beat? What's the problem? Where's the hiccup in the system here? And it became very obvious very quickly that it's a combination of limited resources. Like if someone is out sick, it's not getting done. No one's going through the archive. And the other problem is the archive itself, which I said, it's like very unstructured. It's hard to find the newsworthy items unless you go through 400 entries every day and read every document, which takes hours. You just won't you won't be good enough. You will miss out on stories. And when those two things kind of combine, you see a clear need for something better. Like if we were to get rid of the archive and provide them a better tool to find these stories, that would alleviate a lot of the problems we were facing. So that's kind of the idea behind it.
But how is it in terms of, I mean, iTromsø is again a small local newspaper in northern Norway. I mean, it seems for me like building something like this, you would expect like a big tech team and so on. But talk to me a little bit about the team building this. And then I think a lot of people are thinking a little bit, does AI mean that you can create things with less is more and so on? Just take me a little bit through like the team and the building this.
It's a complex question, because I think with the right competence, you don't need many resources to build something that provides a lot of value. Djinn is not one of those things. It's quite complex. What we did, because we're a small newsroom with only 5 people on this data desk, we can't do like big development projects ourselves. We need help. So we have a strategy where we collaborate quite broadly with a lot of different partners, like universities for research projects, research and development projects with other private companies, and stuff like that. And we're part of a lot of networks. What we did when we saw this need, we started putting out feelers in these networks, like, is anyone else interested in kind of working on a problem like this? Can we co-create a solution with anyone? Because we have limited resources, we can allocate some resources to this, but we can't like do that 100% all the time for a year. We wouldn't be able to like cover the news cycle properly if we did that. So and luckily IBM was really excited about this idea because they have had very little kind of a presence within the media and publishing sector.
Did they came into this? Like you had them on speed dial on phone, or how did they come into this?
They're also part of a media hub in Bergen called Media City, Bergen. And we collaborate quite a lot with them and UIB and SUYO, which is the Center for Investigative Journalism in Bergen. So we were there presenting this idea that we had, and IBM was like, oh, this is maybe interesting. We're just about to launch What's Next, their cloud AI platform. We're looking for use cases. So if you invest some time in this, we'll invest some time in this, and we'll co-create a pilot together. So that's how the pilot came about. Like, we didn't need any money, really. We just needed to invest some time. They did the same, and they had the expertise we needed to round out our team to build something like this. So we had IBM expert labs resources working on the machine learning and the modeling, for example. And we were kind of handling more the strategic idea things and kind of course correcting as development progressed.
So we started asking this sort of with the intro question, like what the journalists thought, but you talk very clearly here, like the way that you guys done it in iTromsø is that the journalist is part from the get-go building this. But however, introducing something to this and it's all about habits. Do you get people to then start using it? Or you're just introducing something that's there, but maybe people don't know. The only take to this is that I've sort of also seen a little bit like, I know sometimes some things that I'm doing, it takes a long time, but I like it because I'm used to how to do it. How was this like getting in with Djinn to then sort of doing this work and implementing it to the journalists?
Yeah, so I think part of the reason we succeeded in this, because we did, is because we involved everyone from the get-go. They were familiar with the tool. They could influence the development of it, tailoring more and more specifically to them and their needs. And once we launched the pilot, they already knew the tool, they trusted it, and they had ownership of the solution. They felt like they were part of building this. I think that's key. Yeah. And one, like, because there's two stages to the Djinn project as well. One is the pilot that we did internally at iTromsø, and the other part is when we had that pilot and we saw the first week that we had like pretty fresh journalists straight out of school writing cover stories within this beat based on help from Djinn. We took it to Polaris Media, which is our owner, and said, we have this great pilot. We see the value immediately. Not only does it like lessen the research time for experienced journalists, it makes it easier for fresh journalists to write these kind of stories. And these are stories that our readers really care about. We want to scale it up to other Polaris newspapers. And they said, go for it. We'll fund the expansion. So that kind of let us productionize the tool or platform and let us scale it. At first, we scale it up to 5 of the largest newspapers in Polaris, and then we scale it out to the rest. And once journalists who hadn't been involved in creating this tool, like outside of iTromsø, got their hands on it, the feedback was incredibly positive because they, like they said, this is obviously made by journalists for journalists. Like it answered a lot of or it kind of fulfilled a lot of the needs they had in the same area.
Let me ask you this question, and we're gonna get into sort of the leaper into Polaris Media, because for every of the listeners don't knowing it, iTromsø is part than a news brand within a bigger publisher group called Polaris Media in Norway, and are rather big in the Nordics. But then it's clearly here that having the journalists here from joining you from the get-go was trivial. It was part of the success. But what does that really mean in terms of that? What was like the steps from like introducing the idea to getting feedback? Just before we do the leap to here to Polaris, take us through that.
Yeah, so first we kind of do user-driven design. That's the methodology we use in these kind of projects. We start out with a workshop, get all the journalists into the workshop that are familiar with the ones that have domain expertise. And then we basically kind of like just throw around ideas until something sticks. We can say, okay, like you put on a green hat, give us your craziest ideas. Don't think about limitations, don't think about funding, don't think about technical implementation. Just what are your needs? Like, what's like problematic? How could we solve it? And then we do prioritization based on that, like what is actually feasible? How can we scope this in a way that is realistic? And we like boil it down together with the journalists into something that's actually actionable, like building a pilot. And then we slowly introduce more of those features that there weren't room for within the scope of the pilot into the expanded solution once we kind of start scaling up.
And you now had the journalists joining you. We established that having them, at least in the case of iTromsø, having them from the get-go, this was trivial in making it a success. So now you made it from iTromsø, one news brand, to introducing it to the bigger group. So you said sort of the feedback was great. This is definitely made by journalists, but surely this must have been there must have been some challenges in scaling, or was this just the best product ever?
But back to that, I think it's important to mention that as we were scaling, we also had test groups with journalists from the other brands. Not as they weren't following it as tightly, but they were there to course correct. Because, like mentioned, iTromsø, for example, we have our preferences, right? For a tool, for what we want to cover, what we consider a good story, what's important to us and our journalists. That might not be the case other places, right? Like I can't assume that the same challenges that apply to Tromsø also applies to Trondheim or Oslo or Kristiansand.
A reindeer in northern Norway is not the same as it would be in the south, because if I saw a reindeer outdoors, I would, oh my God, this is first cover. This is high up on the front page.
Exactly. So what's newsworthy might differ by quite a lot, like the contextual the context that gives newsworthiness is also dependent on geography, on local factors, on culture, all of this. So that was one challenge. And the other challenge is like catering to the needs of those journalists, because they might be different as well. Like maybe they have a different web portal in their municipality that's much better than Tromsø's. Luckily, that wasn't the case. Djinn actually did supplant those tools as well, but that we weren't sure about this, so we spent a lot of time kind of evaluating the situation outside of Tromsø, like for Trondheim, for Oslo, for the local newsrooms, involving those journalists and then using their feedback as we were productionizing.
I might get the terminology wrong here, but you surely worked more with AI than me. But then we often hear the term here, fine-tuning AI model. But then how did you sort of make the AI that represented Djinn take into account these things that were different in one newsroom versus, for example, iTromsø?
Yeah, so Djinn is kind of a system. It's not so much one model as an AI-empowered system. It uses multiple classifier models, which is kind of the core of the newsworthiness ranking, which you're talking about right now. What we saw for iTromsø was fine with one model that was trained on feedback from our journalists. And what we did, I think that's relevant as well to mention how we did it, because modeling newsworthiness is tricky. What we did was model the journalist's judgment of whether something was newsworthy or not, and using that as a rating system. So we used a proxy. We don't like define newsworthiness in any way. We let the model figure out what's newsworthy in all this data based on if a journalist gave it a thumb up or a thumb down. And that worked really well for iTromsø. Like after 500 training pairs, I don't know if that makes sense to the listener, but like you need quite a bit of training data to build a model that's accurate. 500 is very little in the grand scheme of things, like usually like 30,000 training pairs, for example. But we managed with 500 to get a working, pretty precise model that met our needs. But once we scaled it up to Trondheim and using the same model, it failed completely because the data was different, place names are different, persons are different. Like it wouldn't see the same patterns. It wouldn't pick up the same kind of factors as it was trained on in Tromsø.
Why was that? What was different?
Because it was only trained on data specific for Tromsø. It's very important to kind of tailor your models to the actual data that you're going to be, the real data that you'll be using it on. It's like any AI model is bound by its training data. It won't generalize well outside of it. So what we did, we implemented a two-model system where we have one model that's now being trained by every newsroom in Polaris, based on feedback from every journalist within the Polaris system that uses Djinn. That's a general news ranker. It kind of picks up on everything that's broadly newsworthy across Norway. While each newsroom also has a unique model that's only trained by feedback from their journalists. And then we combine those two models into, or the scores from those two models into kind of combined newsworthiness score, which kind of caters both to the local factors as well as the more general factors. And it works really, really well.
When you say it works really, really well, do you have any concrete examples so you sort of could see like the immediate success in, for example, one region versus the other? Like I'm very often like, what were the outcomes of this? What's measurable?
So what's measurable is it's kind of actually like evaluating the model is more qualitative. It's up to the newsrooms to say that, okay, it's picking up on the things that we think are important. But what we see very quickly once we kind of train the model and implement it is that we get a very clear ladder of importance or relevance. Like say there's 400 documents published from a municipal archive on a Monday. On that Monday, you can start at the back of Djinn. Like you actually you can view all the documents in Djinn. You can go through them all. Everything that's being published by the municipality, you can see. That's kind of a safeguard. We need transparency in these kind of tools. We need to be able to evaluate it. So if you go to the back, all the way down to the lowest ranked items, you'll see that they are totally relevant to journalists, and almost 100% of the time. Like it will be someone, for example, splitting up their property, ceding 2 meters of it to their 2 square meters to their neighbor, or someone wanting to build a shed. Things that we don't generally write about or that we don't consider important. And as you go up, it gets more and more impactful. At the top, you have those clear, like, oh my God, this is a great story. You know, the mayor of Tromsø is building a house, and the neighbors hate it, and they're complaining, and there's a huge fight, and everyone's miserable. Like this is something we would cover, for example. Or there's a huge project being built in a protected area. something like that. You know, like you see these cases very clearly stand out at the top.
So Adrian, exactly this what you're taking up here, I find extremely important because having been part on the software side and seeing AI being built and gone to the INMA events, the Van Infra, so a lot of talk when it's about implementing AI in the newsroom, which I think correlates to when it's talking about what was the outcome, time saved. But you pointed out sort of like on the stories here, like, did you find that by implementing Djinn, both in iTromsø, but also feedback from Polaris Media, that you felt we started on being able to focus on other stories that we didn't really know was sort of a case, but because it saved us time, we allowed us. So going from sort of like, it saved us time, but what about the content? We live for content. So any findings here?
Yeah, so what we see, like, I can get to the metrics after, but what we see is that we have way more time. Like we freed up 80% of the time we spent doing research to do other stuff, and we can spend that time making better stories, like increasing the quality of the journalism. And that's also been our strategy, like our intent from the get-go. We wanted not only to speed up things, we wanted to improve on the work we were doing. Because what we saw was that journalists that spent a lot of time going through these archives, they barely had any time to finish the stories. Once they found something that was newsworthy, they often would kind of just write it out based on the document and publish without talking to anyone. Or, you know, like just, this is happening in Tromsø municipality, but nobody wants to read that. They want to read about people and the problems, or kind of the relatable. They're looking for the relatable factors in the news. So instead of writing about a house blocking the view of a neighbor and the neighbor sending a complaint to the municipality, we want to hear from Leif, 60, who's miserable because his entire view is blocked by a 5-story building right in front of his dinner. What do you call it? I'm losing my English a little bit. The stue.
The living room. The living room in this case.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's a much better story. Those are the stories that people want to read.
But it seems to me that by doing this, you get better time to the actual story, and that's the one thing that your investigative journalists are able to do.
Exactly. We have much more time to case up stories, find the really good cases, and talk to people, and fact check everything. You know, like the journalistic workflow, the actual craft of journalism. We free up way more time to do that.
And probably also being first on the scene as well, because if you get the hands on the insights there.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you have any examples of sort of like one use case in the iTromsø? Like you had the example here with the neighbor, but you have an actual case here where you were sort of first to get the information or anything that you would want to share?
Because we're doing a lot of other things apart from Djinn when it comes to kind of using machine learning and AI to create knowledge or gain insight. One of them is what we call the fisheries base. It's a fisheries database, where we collected several million catch notices, I think is the word in English, where a ship has to when a ship delivers fish to a processing plant or buyer, they get one of these messages.
And just for sort of the listeners, of course, Tromsø being Norway, but Norway is big on oil, but also fish. The
fisheries are huge. It's also one of the largest exports in Norway, like apart from oil. So you thought this, like the news media doesn't really have a good oversight of what goes on in the fisheries. It's also very complex, and you need kind of domain expertise to kind of approach that area. And it's not easy for any journalist to kind of get involved with and find the good stories. What we did, we wanted to chart sustainability. Like, are the fisheries in Norway sustainable? So we started collecting all this data. One of the data sources were these catch notices, like that says how much fish they delivered and how much money they got out of it. We also got data on catches from the boats themselves, from because they have to register catches and stuff like that. And then we built a database and applied advanced kind of machine learning models to analyze that data and find outliers, find trends, patterns that would be very hard for a human to do because the data amount is so vast. It's incredibly hard for a single person or a team to do anything meaningful with it and discover or create new insights. You'll have to be lucky. But that led us to a solution that is really powerful when it comes to kind of finding these patterns. And one of these patterns that we saw were kind of the outliers that indicated illegality, like where someone is fixing prices or dumping fish, like catching more than they, for example, deliver. Where did the rest go? Stuff like that. And what happened was we quickly realized that one of the fish processing plants right outside of Tromsø, we did this for all of Norway, but right outside of Tromsø, there was one of these outliers that kind of stood out over time as there being something not quite right going on there. There's something fishy with finances. There's something fishy with how much is being delivered, how much they pay. The prices were kind of standing out a little bit. And then last year, the police, the National White Collar Crime Unit, and the Coast Guard raided the place. And all the news organizations in Norway got an alert from the police saying, large-scale operation ongoing at a fishery plant in northern Norway. That was all they had to go on. And they didn't know which plant it was, who was involved, where it was happening. But we could be there as the Coast Guard was arriving. We had a journalist on the scene because we knew. We took a chance based on our data, and we hit the mark.
That's absolutely amazing. I think there's these sort of examples that tells what can happen. I have a question in terms of this as well, because AI is, from what I sort of understand, really good at sort of understanding details and summaries of maybe documents and so allowing you to be there. But journalists are always better to tell than the story and then the other parts. But then, have you seen any change in terms of like the municipalities, or like the example here where the fish, like the people providing the data, that it leads to bigger transparency? Because I think one of the things that is huge in journalism is holding, power to account, I think. And this, I think with AI era, is that transparency, this is a hypothesis, but I think transparency will be better because it's easier to discover these things now.
Yeah, definitely. I think, like, our approach, we've been focusing on data-driven journalism for quite a while, like before the huge AI hype of 2022. And we do that because it gives us hard facts or insights that we can use to hold power to account or to challenge preconceived notions of how society is working, or it gives us the tools to do the other, like another type of journalism, lifting it outside of the anecdotal. And AI is perfect. It's a perfect evolution of that, because it lets us do it at scale that we couldn't before.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely the case here. I think you're into it, but it's really here that, is it this with AI being better to discover the things happening in like the public data and so on, does this increase sort of the transparency in terms of how they work with data? Or are they like, oh my God, Lars and the team at iTromsø is gonna get us this time unless we're being transparent?
I don't think that's the case at all, at least not from public data providers, because what we've experienced, and what I was getting at before I lost complete track of my train of thought, was that with a data-driven approach, you can uncover facts. And if you kind of model that approach in an AI system, you can do it at scale and provide exclusive, important news stories. And that's being picked up by public officials, politicians. They see that what we do has an impact. And that impact is usually good. You know, like we used Byen, our city. It's a project where we used kind of these data-driven methods to highlight inequality in Tromsø that people weren't aware of, led to the municipality getting a ton of funding to equal out these problematic inequalities between parts of the city. And after that, it's been much easier to get data from them because they see the importance of it, of providing that data to let us do these kind of important projects. And it's the same with the fisheries. Like we were invited to a conference hosted by the White Collar Crime Unit, the National White Collar Crime Unit, to tell them how we did this, because they had no idea. And now they're much easier to work with, to gain access to data they have that might be relevant for us.
And this will definitely help in any single way.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the more people do things like that, the more data will become available.
I have another question on this, and I think it's the perfect one to ask journalist, especially investigative journalist, but also a philosopher in many ways. And I ask myself this, and I think it's a lot of talk in the industry about, is AI going to take a lot of sort of like the journalist jobs? And just my question on this is sort of like, how do you use AI in investigative journalism, which is great at, but what will it never take out of a journalist? That is the skill set. You must have been making thoughts on this.
Yeah, I do, because to us it's been very important to not kind of replace our journalists. We've gone into this and invested heavily in AI development because we wanted to empower our journalists. Because we know, like, we're a small newspaper in a town where there are a ton of other news organizations. You have the public broadcaster, you have TV2 has offices right underneath us, or right below us. You have a large regional paper that's also covering Tromsø with way more resources than we do. So what we see at the Tromsø is that people are very loyal. They love their jobs, but they're running very quickly. Like, they're pushing themselves because they have to, because we have to be as fast and deliver better or as good journalism as our competition, which has way more resources. And that's not sustainable in the long run, right? People are going to burn out, quit, join the competition. So we see AI as kind of a great way to alleviate some of those stressors, like by giving them kind of freeing up their time, lowering the stress levels, but getting the job done, and often getting it done better than before. That's only Tromsø. This is part of the problem, right? Because that's our goal. But a news organization like Hearst Media, for example, or one of the big publishers in Scandinavia, like, I'm not gonna like say anyone is doing it, but we have seen cases of people replacing journalists with AI solutions, like desk editors or print copy editors that were kind of creating the print editions have been fired. There's been downsizing in a lot of the US big publishing houses. And this is like, it has already happened, and it is happening. There's definitely, like, it's tricky, because as with any new technology, you will see that, like we saw it with the Industrial Revolution, less farmers. You saw it when transitioning from kind of an industrial society to a post-industrial society, a knowledge kind of knowledge society, knowledge-driven society or economy. It's bound to happen, right?
I think you were talking about history repeats itself, and we're getting now a little bit outside of maybe sort of the Djinn part. I want to get into it, but I just want to ask you the question here, because this came just to me. This has not been prepped and everything, but I'll ask you, Lars, is that you mentioned like the history here, it repeats itself with the farmers and everything. What skill sets do you think that journalists needs to apply today within AI in order to sort of stand stronger in the new world that we're gonna meet?
I think that goes back to the last part of your previous question, which is kind of not sure I'm paraphrasing, but like, what is the human element in this? You know, like what is a journalist providing that is valuable? And I think that is their judgment, both professional and ethical. That's what kind of makes a news story, right? It's all these decisions that we make about what's included, what's not included. How do you tell this in a way that reaches your intended audience? How do you kind of factor in what's most important? All these small decisions. It's something where the whole is much greater than the parts. You know, like you make all these small decisions, and you might even not think about it as you're doing it as a journalist. But you are doing it. And that's what provides value to that piece of information that the reader gets.
I think it's the judgment, as you said, like the being able to judge sort of the newsworthiness. So AI is good at understanding the patterns in many things. But one thing I hear constantly working in Kilkaya, where we sit down with data on the stories and article, is that, oh my God, I didn't expect this sort of content to be doing well on subscription. So if you maybe build something on patterns, you might not also understand then what new audience might be finding something interesting. And we're working towards creating a feeling, a sensation from reading something. And that's maybe the judgment that you're talking about.
Yeah, it's part of it. Like as you work in journalism, much broader than that as well. As you work in journalism over time, you develop kind of a sensitivity or kind of gut feeling in regards to a lot of things. But that gut feeling, that's that judgment in action, right? It's that trained professionalism, like making those snap decisions continuously. Like, how do I do this? How do I do that? How do I do it in the best way? How do I do it in an ethical way? All that combines into the product that is a news story or our kind of refined information that we provide to others. It's not raw data. It's not like the raw source. It's definitely worked on, right? That's the value of our product. It's this refined information. It's fact checked. It's gone through this process of kind of it's elevating the information from something raw to something that has a lot more value. You're kind of getting rid of the irrelevancies, getting rid of the noise, boiling it down to what is most important to people, or most important to society, like depending on the story, right?
And I think this is building up the trust to news and local journalism. But then I often say the new currency in news is trust, and that's definitely here. And I think we're now getting very like in a philosophy in terms of this. And I think there's a couple of beers now, maybe a couple of gin and tonics. We're going to go down the rabbit hole on this. We need to get back now to sort of also then on the gin, because to summarize this a little bit, is you understood a challenge here. You built something that would then cut sort of the time that the journalists used on sort of getting to the stories, enable them to focus better on the stories, and you gave a lot of great examples. And you scale this from one local newspaper up to a broader. So this was Djinn in terms of documents for municipality. What is the next step with Djinn now and your team? What are you working? Is it still that, or can you take this even further?
Can definitely take it further. Like just the Djinn solution itself, like the platform itself, we can expand it with a ton of features because, like I said, it is in theory a general news gathering platform. It doesn't have to be urban development documents. Like we have the infrastructure for providing feedback, for training models based on any data source, really. So that's definitely like something that's in the future for Djinn, like expanding the type of data that you're pulling in. And kind of also what I want to do ideally is implement more thorough kind of because when it started out, it was more of a like from day to day notification platform of the most newsworthy stories. but it's also a research platform, right? Because we've had it running now for a year and a half, and we've collected well over 1 million documents, and this will just keep getting better and better. Like, we'll have access to more and more historical data, and with that data, you can do a lot of cool stuff. Like on the AI side of things or the machine learning side of things, you can do like network graphing, the whole thing, finding hidden connections between people and topics and projects, like all this cool stuff. So that's definitely on the horizon for Djinn. But then on the other side, because Djinn is one small part of the iTromsø kind of strategy or development, it was more of a pilot for what we could do platform-wise in a broader sense. Because what we're working on now is developing a data platform for Polaris Media as a whole, for all the newspapers in Polaris Media, where ideally we want to orchestrate all data that is relevant to a newsroom and have like model storage, like all these, using advanced techniques to analyze the data, combine it, find new information, and then alert journalists or newsrooms to those findings. So that's what we're kind of working on, which is Djinn 10x or 100x, like a solid platform.
Taking it to the next level, and it's great sort of saying that it wasn't only Djinn. This was just one step in terms of where you're heading. But in Kilkaya, we focus a lot on AI and within personalization, especially on the front page. And one thing that we focus a lot on is that human in the loop, because we believe that, of course, you can put the AI model to then be able to then showcase the different articles that are right for the reader. But I think with AI is very much, it's important with human in the loop. And I think we read about it, not necessarily in news and so on, but AI comes with risk, biases, misinformation. And every time, Lars Jensen, who was on the first episode here, in terms of then having an AI model tag the content for you, every time you automate something, you might lose something. Talk to me about how you work with human in the loop in now Polaris Media, iTromsø, and what you do.
Yeah, so we started out, this was back in April 2023. That's when we started the MVP phase of Djinn. And building like kind of bigger, more advanced AI systems. And to us, it was really important to have a human in the loop, because, like I said, this was supposed to empower journalists. But it also had to adhere to journalistic standards or principles. Like, it needs to be transparent. You need to understand how it's doing its thing. You need to be able to check that you're actually getting the news stories that's relevant to you, or the potential news stories. You have to have features that make fact-checking easy. So that's all baked into the solution design. Like, it's not built to fully automate the writing of the story. It's built to provide the journalist with a start, where the human takes over and kind of does the actual journalistic handcraft. But as time has gone by and models have gotten better, and there are better ways of implementing, or we've discovered better ways of robustifying AI systems. Sometimes I think, like, I started out thinking a human in the loop is really important, and in some cases it is. But I also think there are use cases or systems where a human in the loop would hinder the system or introduce biases that are unwanted, for example. So I don't think it's as clear-cut as I did 2 years ago. I think you have to very carefully evaluate what you're building, how you're building it, and what the intention is. To not create, like, in some workflows, having the human in the loop would create more work for journalists than necessary, for example, instead of lessening the time spent.
But you said this, I mean, being an investigative journalist yourself, building this with journalists, you were so connected with the workflow, how you did this. And it was also similar to maybe some of the, not in the first time with Polaris Media, but built by understanding the different workflows. And then where does it come? we have sort of this debate when it comes to sort of doing personalization of presenting content on the front page, and it's very natural. Most of the clicks happen on the top 3 placements on the front page, but it's so little clicks on the below. So below, it might be okay to be running an AI model that is then constantly learning and you might not know, but on the top, that's maybe not where you then want to have what the algorithm is telling, but where you do editorial. So you understand here, I think understanding, it starts with understanding the workflows, and from there you understand what to do automation.
Yes. I think this is where AI really shines. Like you mentioned it several times, like how Kilkaya uses AI to both like discover reading patterns that we might not be aware of. It's kind of exactly the same thing we're doing from an investigative standpoint. It's like looking at all this data and seeing patterns or gaining new insights, creating new knowledge. And doing it like that, it's greatly empowering to individuals as well as organizations. You know, like just knowing that most of the traffic comes from those 3 top stories lets you kind of think in new terms about what you can do with the rest of the front page, for example. And stuff like that. And we're doing exactly the same thing at iTromsø. We have 6 locked positions at the top, and then we have algorithmically personalized news flow. And that works. But I'm sure, like, if we were to analyze it further, like dig really deep into it, we could find, I think, totally outside the box, totally new ways of delivering the news on this platform. And I think AI could help us do that.
That's sort of like one of the last questions on this, because originally I was thinking, and I asked this question to myself, and I think it's rather the time I've set on this is rather stupid, because looking 10 years ahead, I don't think AI is every day it's moving so fast. I don't even think it makes sense to look in 10 years. So I'm going to be bringing it down to, how do you think, like in short term just now, and then maybe 2 years in, how do you see AI shaping the future of journalism? Because it's very changing habits of reading news and everything. I mean, just a few outlooks. You must have perspectives on this.
I think we're moving into kind of intelligence economy. We're now in a, like, at least Norway is, a lot of other places are knowledge-driven economies. And the work that is knowledge-driven, it's not a, what do you call it? It's not a kind of factory workflow where things are done step by step. It's not linear. Like you pick some information here and then, oh, maybe I'll analyze it that way, and then get some information here, and then it creates new knowledge that is important to people, like be it climate knowledge about how the climate works, or how to drill more efficiently for oil, or, you know, all of these things. And that takes a human element. Like there's consultancies earning billions doing this kind of work on a daily basis. But what we're seeing now is the AI models are getting better and better, quicker and quicker. Like I just heard about a very interesting study that's been done on the length of tasks that an agent can do. And that doubles every 7 months. 7 months. And that will likely, that's quite impactful, because it says something about the complexity of the work being done.
Lars Adrian, can you just, because I think that one of the things, AI agent, it's self-explanatory, but just explain it to the listeners in the context of that news.
Yeah, so everyone is familiar with ChatGPT, right? It's a language model that you can ask questions and you get a reply. It doesn't initiate any action on itself. And well, now it does also call on tools like the web browser, like it can do web searches, or it can create an image for you. These are tools. The model itself, it's passive. It's waiting for you to give it a prompt. An agent, on the other hand, is a more complex system made up of such language models with the ability to plan and execute actions based on it over time. It can be running continuously, for example. It can be booking hotel rooms for you using like a virtual phone call to the hotel. Like it can call on all these tools that you define. It can plan, strategize, and execute. That's the short of it. Very simplified explanation of an AI agent. Then you have frameworks of many of these agents that can collaborate. So suddenly you have 200,000 of these doing complex work using tools like web search, building analytical models, doing analysis, all that stuff. And the complexity and the quality of the work that's being produced is getting quite good. What we see now, like I was just in a panel with a consultant from IBM who said, is it as good as my work? No, not really, but it's very close. And if the complexity of the task, if it keeps doubling, like if the ability to solve very complex problems over time grows exponentially, it will be a very short amount of time until that work can be done by an agent instead of a human and provide equally good or better results. And that's something that's highly relevant to news organizations as well and journalists. Because I think we have to think about, or any knowledge industry professional really, like be it law, be it journalism, be it consultancy, coding, anything. I think we have to kind of envision what our roles are to be in the future. And when I say future, I'm thinking 2 years from now. Because suddenly there will be breakthroughs in efficiency and costs. That's the limiting factor now. That's why we're not seeing more agents in business right now, is because it's quite costly to run these. Requires often to have a well-established cloud platform. You have to have good data orchestration, a good data strategy, all of these things that are kind of not in place for a lot of businesses. And investing in it is really expensive. And the models themselves are costly to run and train. But once costs are down, we saw that with DeepSeek, right? Like when that came, like they trained this incredible model on a percentile of what was used to train the GPT model. Once these things kind of get to a point where they're very cheap and deliver quality work, you have to start thinking, okay, what is my role in this? Is it doing the same kind of tasks that I used to do, or is it something different? And that's where I think a lot of news organizations will find themselves in like a very short amount. It might not be 2 years, it might be 5 years, but it will happen.
There was just this commercial at the moment from Perplexity, which sort of made the disruption with Google, which is the main character from then Squid Games in Netflix, where it's then asking the person to then answer a question, and he tries Googling it, and it fails every time because he uses too long time. But he uses Perplexity just to have it listen and then answer the question to sort of make it. It's going to happen so much disruption there. But I'm also thinking, I think you're onto something, and I think having a strategy right now in terms of what this is going to be, maybe something that you want to have in your plan, because we see a lot of deals being made with OpenAI. For example, Schibsted just did one, Axel Springer, and so on. And one thing is that should maybe the AI agents be built directly in terms maybe of the news publishers, the brands themselves, in terms of the information they're sitting on expertise, or do you serve it to somebody else to sort of take the advantage? I think it's some of the things I'm thinking of these days.
I think it would depend on the use case and the needs. Like, do you have the money to outsource it? Or do you have the competence and resources to actually build it in-house? You know, like, there's a lot of things that would impact that decision. And I don't think there's right or wrong to it. But I think we shouldn't be giving away too much of what is our goal, which is kind of the journalistic domain expertise that's been built up over time, and the refined data that we're in possession of, like our product. That is our product. It's refined information. and the data that underlies that information. I think that is what has value in a news organization. It's like that workflow, that kind of refinement, ethical refinement of information to inform, and what goes into that. And giving too much away to tech giants or like these huge tech firms that we don't have any, like we can't influence them in any meaningful way. We can't influence the direction of their development. And we don't really have any guarantees, even though we've signed deals, that they won't misuse our information or data.
Let's just hope they have damn good negotiation teams to then have these contracts. I hope that these teams are strong.
Yeah, I to summarize, I think you should be hesitant to do what Schibsted did. But then again, like we talked about agents and them coming onto the scene, maybe forcing people to redefine their roles in the industry. I also think the media will face massive challenge in that, like we saw with Facebook when that came, or any of the big like social media platforms, we couldn't really compete. Like most of the kids these days are getting their news from TikTok. And I think we'll see a transition from traditional social media platforms into generative ecosystems. Like you mentioned Perplexity, which is a great example of that. You know, like people are, instead of Googling something, they're going into ChatGPT or asking Claude or asking Perplexity. And I think these systems, as these kind of giant, if the bubble doesn't pop for AI, we'll see like OpenAI becoming the Google of its age, for example. I'm not saying it will be that company, but some company will become huge and they will develop tools and interfaces for their users through the use of generative AI in ways that are kind of hard to imagine right now. Like they will be fully integrated generative systems that caters to our needs. And then where is the news media's role in that? That's kind of up in the air, right? I think some will, like, maybe it's smart to do what Schibsted did. You know, like become part of it early on, become like a source that's trusted within the generative platform, and thereby kind of build community in that space. Maybe. Yeah. I don't know. It's hard to tell.
We have to wait and see. Lars Adrian, we're coming to sort of the closing part of this, and thinking a little bit back on the whole journey with them creating Djinn, they now looking further into what are you going to be doing with AI and overall in Polaris Media. And just for all of the listeners, Lars Adrian I see you most on the different places, also outside Norway. You're a go-to person on this, and I think having talks with you, I learned something new always the same. So I highly recognize you for the work you're doing here, and I think the industry is doing so as well. What was the most unexpected or rewarding part for you going into this?
Oh, very, very challenging question, because I think all of it is rewarding in some kind of way. Like you're with it. I'm working now in a field where what happens in a week in most other industries happens over 10 years. Because like every day there's a new model, maybe 2, maybe 3. Every day there's some new innovation, some new way of doing something. And it's just accelerating. So I think what's most rewarding to me is like that kind of, it's such a space for learning, right? Like I'm forced to, like I can't not if I'm going to do my job. So there's a lot of kind of, it's a steep learning curve every day, which is really fun. And you gain a lot of insight into other fields outside, because it's all kind of AI in a theoretical sense, like the field of AI as an academic field is tied to maths, it's tied to statistics. But where we see value is when it's implemented, right? Or applied to a broad range of fields, not only journalism. So I've learned a ton about different industries, different parts of society where AI is being utilized and how we can kind of benefit from innovation happening there.
Where do you best learn, Lars Adrian, on AI?
Twitter used to be pretty good. It's not anymore. Because you have like direct access to the researchers doing cool stuff that were tweeting about it on a day-to-day basis. Like, I'm making this progress on this model way before the paper ended up on archive, for example, or in preprint. But now most have transitioned to LinkedIn, which I love. It's really good for kind of keeping up to date with kind of voices in the AI community, with researchers, with industry professionals working with AI. So you get a lot of like the news there way before it ends up anywhere else, or it's kind of reposted on different platforms. So that's pretty good. I also use archive a lot, like looking through preprints, what are other people doing, both like white papers and academic papers. And then there's the conference space, which I think is really cool within the AI community, especially within media. Because in media, we've tended to hold our cards very close to our chest, right? Not share secrets. But when it comes to AI, there's a whole different culture where people are sharing what they're doing, looking for collaborators, doing a lot of stuff open source. So that's pretty cool. I know there's a lot of proprietary stuff going on, but we're still getting like this kind of information exchange that's outside of the norm within the industry as a whole.
I think you're spot on. I don't think the podcast I'm having now would be possible 5-6 years ago, in terms of like. But I've said it before on the podcast, and I say it again. News publishers, journalism needs to sort of collaborate on tech and also strategy, but do compete on the content.
Yeah, I totally agree with you.
I think that's the way moving forward.
Yeah, and this goes back to what we were talking about with tech companies. Like, we can't compete with them on the tech side as individuals. Like, iTromsø is a tiny newspaper. VG is a large national paper, but it's tiny compared to like a tech giant. Like, we don't stand a chance if we're not together in this.
Lars Adrian, for people wanting to maybe reach out to you, maybe read a little bit of your thoughts on this, where can they follow your work or reach out to you?
They can do it on LinkedIn, as mentioned, or they can just send me an email at giske@itromsø.no. Quite simple. It's out there. And also, I have to mention it, I'm very active on Slack. So any like AI network, send me an invite. I'll join.
Fantastic. Lars Adrian, we sort of come to the end here, and I think this is a must listen to podcast for a lot of people, because I think we've gone down the rabbit hole on some of the cases. We've been able to also understand like how you went through. I think you've been brilliant at sort of articulating, involving the different journalists, and then how you built Djinn, and then the next steps. We have a closing tradition in this podcast of then the previous guest to leave a question for the new guest. They don't know who it is, but on the previous podcast, actually the podcast launched today, which was with Eva Krustok, who's the very fancy title Chief Innovation and AI Officer in Delphi Media, the biggest sort of publisher in the Baltics. It's a great. Yeah, he said he has all of the keywords for SEO in his title, which is impressive. And you sort of touch a lot on this. It happens all the time. We're always ending up with sort of like the question that I wanted the question sort of not be leading up to this, but his question was: let's just say here that there's a movement maybe to a little bit boycotting US tech. What do you think the role is going to be in terms of maybe where we are in Europe and so on, but also tech from the US, given what's happening there, and what decision you think news needs to take in terms of technology you choose to work with?
I think that's it's kind of multi-layered, because there's already a lot of roadblocks to using US tech in Europe because of GDPR, because of the AI Act. So we have to make sure that data we store is stored in European data centers. It has to be processed in Europe. All of these things. And there's a lot of US tech that would be brilliant for news production that's not being used because of these limitations. And things aren't rolled out to Europe as quickly as in the US. So we have to wait. We find our own way, right? So that's already, there's like some kind of like limitations already in place, which has meant that news organizations in Europe are already quite kind of, I think a lot of news organizations have familiarized themselves with the European scene, with alternatives, with open source solutions. And a lot of what we do don't necessarily require the best model or the biggest model. A lot of what I do, at least, requires small, tailored models that do a specific thing. But I think if you want to like make an ethical stand because of what's happening in the US, you're fully able to do so today. I'm not sure though that like with the rate of technological advancement happening at the moment, especially in the US and in China, it would be smart of us to completely kind of boycott that based on the politics of the US as a country.
I think a second one that the sort of Eva wanted to know, how do you think this is gonna, with the big tech players especially, we don't need to mention them, but how do you think they're gonna influence the news media moving forward?
Well, we're already seeing it, like OpenAI making deals with certain publishers and not others. Like some will be pushed to the top of replies, while others won't. Like that influences things. It's inherently a bias in the information that's being given, right? As well as there's plenty of studies on the accuracy of kind of generative AI's retelling of news information or information from news articles, and it's very rarely more accurate than 50%. So there's a huge gap in like the actual journalistically quality checked content versus what's being served to people, and that could greatly influence trust in news media over time if that's the platform they're getting their news on. And like we're seeing, like OpenAI, for example, ChatGPT had 0 referrals when it launched, right? In less than, was it 8 months, it went from 0 to 100,000 referrals to news sites. So people are like actively searching for information that is being pulled from news articles in that platform. And that's just gonna get huge, right? Not only will it like influence kind of like how our stories are ingested or digested by the reader if they use a generative platform, it also kind of greatly influences how news media as a whole will develop in the years to come and how it will change. I think that's important to keep in mind.
Lars Adrian, you get to ask a question for the new guest, not knowing who that person is, what they do. I know, but it's somebody in the industry. It can be any sort of question related to the industry, or just like you being an ex-philosopher and I'm doing that. Do you have a question that you sort of want to sort of get an answer to?
Definitely. Okay, so my question is this. If you could do anything you wanted, like without any limitations with AI, what would it be?
Wow, that is interesting. It's going to be interesting in which sort of setting this guest is then wanting to take that, because that has, yeah, wow, that's going to be interesting for the next guest. Lars Adrian, this has been absolutely fantastic, and I think for very many, I would recommend this to be one of the listens to do. I think it's been great. You've been great at listening to the story about Djinn, but Djinn is only the beginning. You've done lots of other projects in the start of something bigger. So I want to thank you for your time and I'm doing this podcast. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure as always.
Hope your listeners enjoy this as well and see you for the next episode.